Captain Sarah Martinez stood at attention in the morning formation, her dress uniform crisp and her combat medals gleaming in the early sunlight. The base was buzzing with activity as soldiers prepared for the annual award ceremony. Sarah had been selected to receive the Distinguished Service Cross for her actions during a classified mission in Syria 6 months earlier. It was the second highest military decoration for valor, and she wore it with quiet pride. The mission that earned her the medal had been unlike anything she'd experienced in her 12 years of military service. As a member of an elite special forces unit known only by the codename Shadow 7, Sarah had infiltrated enemy territory with her team to rescue hostages held by a terrorist cell. When their extraction point was compromised, Sarah had single-handedly held off 30 enemy combatants while her team evacuated the civilians. She'd sustained multiple injuries but refused to retreat until every hostage was safe. What made the situation even more remarkable was that Sarah's unit operated under such high classification that most of the military brass had no idea of her true capabilities or training. To them, she appeared to be just another infantry captain who'd gotten lucky in combat. The medal ceremony was one of the few times her extraordinary service would receive public recognition, though the specific details of her mission remained classified. General Richard Blackwood arrived at the ceremony in his polished staff car, stepping out with the swagger of a man accustomed to absolute authority. At 58 years old, Blackwood was a career politician in uniform, having spent more time in Pentagon offices than actual combat zones. His chest was adorned with ribbons and medals, though most were administrative awards and campaign ribbons from conflicts where he'd served safely behind the lines. Blackwood had a reputation among the enlisted personnel as someone who valued appearance over substance. He was known for his strict adherence to protocol and his belief that certain honors should be reserved for those he deemed truly worthy. In his mind, combat medals like the Distinguished Service Cross should go to seasoned male officers who had proven themselves in traditional warfare, not to young female captains who might have simply been in the right place at the right time. As the ceremony began, Sarah's commanding officer, Colonel James Peterson, introduced each award recipient. When Sarah's name was called, she marched forward with military precision, her movements reflecting years of intensive training. The citation was read aloud, though heavily redacted to protect operational security. It spoke of extraordinary heroism under fire and selfless service that saved multiple lives. General Blackwood stepped forward to present the medal, but as Sarah came to attention before him, something in his expression changed. His eyes narrowed as he looked at her, taking in her youth and gender. In that moment, a decision formed in his mind that would set in motion a chain of events none of them could have anticipated. Instead of pinning the medal to Sarah's uniform as protocol dictated, Blackwood held it in his hands and spoke in a voice loud enough for the assembled crowd to hear. "Captain Martinez, while I appreciate your service, I have concerns about whether this level of recognition is appropriate for someone of your experience level. Perhaps a more suitable award would better reflect your actual contribution to the mission." The words hung in the air like a physical blow. Sarah's face remained impassive, her military training keeping her emotions in check, but inside she felt a surge of anger and disbelief. The assembled soldiers shifted uncomfortably, sensing the tension that had suddenly filled the ceremony space. Colonel Peterson's face darkened with barely controlled fury at the public humiliation of one of his finest officers. Blackwood continued, seemingly oblivious to or unconcerned with the effect of his words. "I'm sure you understand, Captain, that medals of this caliber must be reserved for those who have truly distinguished themselves through exceptional leadership and combat experience. Perhaps we could arrange for a more appropriate recognition of your service." What General Blackwood didn't know was that he was addressing one of the most highly trained and decorated special operations soldiers in the entire military. Sarah's personnel file was so classified that even generals of Blackwood's rank didn't have access to it. Her real service record included operations in over 20 countries, fluency in 6 languages, expert-level training in everything from advanced combat tactics to psychological operations, and commendations from heads of state whose names would never appear in public records. Sarah had volunteered for the most dangerous missions available, often going into situations where capture meant certain death and failure could result in international incidents. She'd trained with elite units from allied nations, mastered weapon systems that most soldiers had never heard of, and developed tactical innovations that were now taught in special operations schools around the world. The Shadow 7 unit was so secretive that its members were required to maintain cover identities even within the military itself. To most of her fellow soldiers, Sarah appeared to be a regular infantry officer who'd had an exceptional deployment. They had no idea that she'd spent 3 years training with British SAS, 2 years with Israeli Mossad operatives, and countless hours in classified facilities learning skills that pushed the boundaries of human capability. Her physical conditioning was far beyond that of ordinary soldiers. Sarah could run a 6-minute mile in full combat gear, complete obstacle courses that left Special Forces candidates exhausted, and engage multiple targets with precision that bordered on supernatural. Her psychological profile showed stress tolerance levels that psychologists initially thought were measurement errors, until they observed her performance under extreme duress. The irony of the situation was lost on Blackwood, but not on several other officers present who had worked with classified units and suspected there was more to Captain Martinez than met the eye. Major David Chen, who served as a liaison with Special Operations Command, watched the proceedings with growing unease. He'd heard whispers about Shadow 7 and suspected that Sarah might be connected to that legendary unit. As Blackwood prepared to dismiss Sarah without presenting her medal, she made a decision that would change everything. Speaking in a voice that carried clearly across the formation, she said, "Sir, with respect, I believe there may be some information about my service record that you might find relevant before making your final decision." The words were carefully chosen, professional and respectful, but there was something in her tone that made several experienced officers take notice. It wasn't defiance exactly, but rather the quiet confidence of someone who knew secrets that others didn't. Blackwood, however, interpreted it as insubordination from a junior officer who didn't know her place. "Captain Martinez," Blackwood said, his voice rising with authority, "I think you've said quite enough. Report to my office after this ceremony. We'll discuss your attitude problem and your future in this man's army." What happened next would become the stuff of military legend, though the full truth would remain classified for years to come. Sarah's response would expose not only Blackwood's ignorance and prejudice, but also reveal capabilities and connections that would shake the very foundations of his understanding of modern warfare. The morning sun continued to shine down on the formation, but the atmosphere had changed completely. What had begun as a routine awards ceremony was about to become a confrontation between old-school military politics and the new reality of 21st-century warfare, where the most dangerous operators might look nothing like what tradition expected. Colonel Peterson stepped forward, his face grave with concern. He'd received Sarah's personnel file when she was assigned to his unit, though most of it was redacted. What he could read had impressed him enormously, and what he couldn't read suggested capabilities far beyond ordinary infantry work. He knew that publicly humiliating Sarah could have consequences that extended far beyond this base. "General Blackwood," Peterson said carefully, "perhaps we could discuss Captain Martinez's full service record before making any final decisions about her recognition." "Colonel, I've been in this army longer than this captain has been alive. I know exceptional service when I see it, and I know when someone is being given recognition they haven't earned. This ceremony is over." But as he turned to leave, Sarah spoke again, and this time her words would begin to unravel everything Blackwood thought he knew about the soldier standing before him. "General," she said, her voice steady and professional, "I have operational clearances that may be relevant to this situation. Perhaps we should continue this discussion in a classified setting." The word sent a chill through the knowledgeable officers present. Operational clearances weren't something that ordinary infantry captains possessed. They were reserved for personnel involved in the most sensitive military operations, the kind that shaped international relations and determined the outcomes of conflicts that the public never knew were being fought. Blackwood paused, uncertainty flickering across his features for the first time. He was beginning to realize that he might have stepped into something much more complicated than a simple awards ceremony, but his pride and prejudice wouldn't allow him to back down from the position he'd taken so publicly. The stage was set for a confrontation that would expose not only the limitations of Blackwood's understanding, but also the extraordinary capabilities of a soldier whose true story was about to emerge from the shadows where it had been hidden for so long. As the assembled soldiers watched in fascination and growing tension, none of them could have guessed that they were about to witness events that would be discussed in military circles for decades to come. or that the quiet captain standing at attention would soon demonstrate just how dangerous it could be to underestimate someone based on appearances alone. General Blackwood's office was a shrine to traditional military hierarchy, with photos of himself with various dignitaries lining the walls and an impressive collection of ceremonial weapons displayed behind his desk. The American flag stood proudly in one corner, while the other held his personal battle standard from his days commanding a logistics division in Iraq. Everything about the room was designed to intimidate and remind visitors of their place in the chain of command. Sarah entered the office at precisely 1400 hours, as ordered. She moved with the fluid grace of someone comfortable in any environment, her bearing suggesting confidence rather than the nervousness Blackwood had expected. Colonel Peterson accompanied her, having insisted on being present for what he suspected could become a significant incident. "Captain Martinez," Blackwood began, settling into his leather chair with practiced authority, "your behavior this morning was completely unacceptable. Questioning a general officer in front of the entire formation shows a fundamental lack of respect for military hierarchy." Sarah remained at attention, her expression neutral. "Sir, I meant no disrespect. I was simply trying to provide relevant information that might affect your decision regarding my commendation." Blackwood leaned back, studying her with the satisfaction of a man who believed he held all the cards. "Captain, I've reviewed your personnel file. Infantry officer, graduated from West Point, deployed twice to Afghanistan. Competent service, but hardly the kind of background that justifies the nation's second highest award for valor." What Blackwood had seen was Sarah's cover file, the sanitized version designed to hide her true role from those without proper clearance. Her real personnel file was stored in a vault 3 levels below the Pentagon, accessible only to a handful of individuals with the highest possible security clearances. That file told a very different story. "Sir," Sarah said carefully, "the file you've reviewed represents only my cover assignment. My actual service record involves operations that require special access clearances." Peterson shifted uncomfortably, beginning to understand the magnitude of what was happening. He'd suspected Sarah was more than she appeared, but the implications of her words were staggering. Special access programs were the most classified operations in the military, involving activities that officially didn't exist, Blackwood scoffed. "Captain, every soldier thinks their deployment was special. You served in a combat zone, you did your job, and now you're trying to inflate your importance. I've seen it 1,000 times before." At that moment, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She reached into her breast pocket and withdrew a small black card, placing it on Blackwood's desk with deliberate precision. The card bore only a series of numbers and letters, but to those who knew what to look for, it represented access to some of the military's most guarded secrets. Colonel Peterson recognized it immediately and felt his blood pressure spike. He'd seen such cards only twice before in his career, both times carried by individuals whose very presence indicated operations of unprecedented importance. The fact that a captain in his command possessed such credentials meant that he'd been completely unaware of who he'd been working with for the past 8 months. "Intend to send," Sarah said, her voice taking on a new quality. "I suggest you run those numbers through the appropriate channels before we continue this conversation." Blackwood picked up the card with growing unease. He'd been in the military long enough to know that some doors were better left unopened, but his pride wouldn't allow him to back down from a confrontation with a junior officer. He activated his secure terminal and input the card's information, expecting to expose what he assumed was an elaborate bluff. The response that appeared on his screen made him go pale. "Access denied. Insufficient clearance. Contact USSOCOM for authorization." The message was followed by a phone number that Blackwood recognized as belonging to United States Special Operations Command, the organization responsible for the military's most sensitive missions. "This is impossible," Blackwood muttered, staring at the screen. "Captains don't carry this level of authorization." Sarah remained silent, letting the implications sink in. She'd known this moment might come eventually, when her dual existence would create an irreconcilable conflict. Her handler at Shadow 7 had warned her that maintaining her cover while serving in a conventional unit carried significant risks. The Shadow 7 unit operated under what intelligence professionals called deep cover, meaning that its members maintained false identities even within the military itself. Sarah's real rank and qualifications were known only to a select few at the highest levels of command. To everyone else, she was exactly what she appeared to be, a competent but unremarkable infantry captain. Blackwood reached for his secure phone with trembling hands. The call connected after 3 rings, and a crisp female voice answered. SOCOM classified operations. This is a secure line. This is General Richard Blackwood, requesting verification of access card 774 Alpha 996, he said, reading from Sarah's card. There was a pause, then the sound of typing. General Blackwood, I'm going to transfer you to Colonel Morrison. Please hold for immediate transfer. The wait seemed eternal, though it lasted only 30 seconds. When Colonel Morrison came on the line, his voice carried an edge that made Blackwood's stomach sink. General, I understand you have questions about one of our people. Before we continue, I need to know the exact circumstances of this inquiry. Blackwood found himself in the unusual position of explaining his actions to someone of lower rank, but the authority in Morrison's voice made it clear that normal hierarchy didn't apply here. I was questioning the appropriateness of a Distinguished Service Cross award for Captain Martinez. She presented this card when I challenged her qualifications. Another pause. Longer this time. General Blackwood, you're dealing with an individual whose operations are classified at the highest possible levels. I'm going to need you to terminate this conversation immediately and await further instructions. Is the individual in question present? Yes, she's here in my office. Good. Do not discuss any aspect of this situation with anyone. Someone will be in contact within the hour. The line went dead, leaving Blackwood staring at the phone in disbelief. In his 30-year career, he'd never been dismissed so abruptly by a subordinate. Yet the authority behind Morrison's words was unmistakable. Sarah spoke for the first time since presenting her credentials. Sir, I apologize for the complexity this has introduced. My cover status requires that most personnel remain unaware of my actual role. Cover status? Blackwood repeated weakly. Just who exactly are you, Captain? Before Sarah could answer, the office phone rang. Blackwood answered it with shaking hands, and a new voice introduced itself as General Patricia Hayes, Deputy Commander of Special Operations Command. General Blackwood, this is an unusual situation that requires immediate clarification. The individual in your office operates under authority that supersedes normal chain of command protocols. I need you to understand that any discussion of her actual role or capabilities is strictly forbidden without proper clearance. Blackwood found his voice. General Hayes, I need to understand what's happening here. I have a captain claiming special status that seems impossible for someone of her rank. General rank insignia in special operations often serves as cover rather than indication of actual authority level. The individual you're dealing with has operational experience and training that exceeds that of most general officers. Her medal was approved at the highest levels of command for actions that officially never occurred. The implications hit Blackwood like a physical blow. He'd publicly humiliated someone whose actual rank and qualifications were apparently far above his own understanding. Worse, he'd done so based on assumptions about gender and conventional military hierarchy that clearly didn't apply in this situation. Colonel Peterson finally spoke up. General Hayes, this is Colonel Peterson, Captain Martinez's commanding officer. How should I proceed with regard to her assignment to my unit? Colonel Peterson, Captain Martinez's assignment to your unit serves important cover functions. She will continue in that role unless operational requirements dictate otherwise. Her actual duties extend far beyond your unit's normal mission parameters. Sarah watched the conversation with professional detachment, though inwardly she was calculating the damage to her carefully constructed cover identity. Years of work building relationships and establishing credibility within conventional forces were potentially compromised by this confrontation. The truth was that Sarah held qualifications that would have made her eligible for promotion to field-grade officer years earlier, but her role required her to maintain the appearance of conventional career progression. Her actual training included advanced degrees from institutions that didn't officially exist, certifications in capabilities that the military wouldn't acknowledge, and experience in operations that shaped global events. General Hayes continued her conversation with Blackwood. I'm dispatching a briefing team to your location. They'll provide you with the minimum necessary information to understand why this situation must be handled with extreme discretion. Under no circumstances should any details of this conversation be discussed with unauthorized personnel. As the call ended, the office fell into uncomfortable silence. Blackwood looked at Sarah with new eyes, beginning to comprehend the magnitude of his mistake. The confident young captain he'd dismissed as unworthy now appeared in an entirely different light. "Captain Martinez," he said finally, "it appears I may have acted without complete information." Sarah's response was carefully neutral. "Sir, my role requires that complete information remain compartmentalized. Your reaction was understandable given the information available to you." But even as she spoke professionally, Sarah was already planning her next moves. The exposure of her credentials meant that her cover identity was potentially compromised. She would need to contact her handler and assess whether her current assignment could continue or if she would need to be extracted and given a new identity. The door to Blackwood's office opened without warning, and two individuals in civilian clothes entered. Their bearing and movement patterns immediately identified them to Sarah as fellow Special Operations personnel. The cleanup team had arrived with impressive speed. "General Blackwood," said the older of the two, a man who appeared to be in his 50s with steel-gray hair. "I'm Mr. Davidson from Special Activities Division. We need to discuss the events of this morning and their implications for ongoing operations." The use of Mr. rather than military rank was another signal that this situation had moved far beyond normal military channels. Special Activities Division was a cover designation for operations that blended military and intelligence agency capabilities, often involving activities that couldn't be officially acknowledged. What followed would be a briefing that opened Blackwood's eyes to a world of military operations he'd never imagined, and would forever change his understanding of the young captain whose medal he'd tried to take away. Davidson's presence filled the room with an authority that made even General Blackwood feel like a junior officer. His companion, a woman who introduced herself only as Agent Chen, began setting up a portable briefing screen while Davidson laid out classified documents that bore security markings Blackwood had never seen before. "General," Davidson began, his voice carrying the weight of someone accustomed to delivering information that changed perspectives permanently, "what I'm about to share with you cannot leave this room. The individual you know as Captain Sarah Martinez represents one of our nation's most valuable assets in the fight against global terrorism." Sarah remained standing at attention, though Davidson gestured for her to be seated. Her demeanor had subtly shifted, and for the first time Blackwood caught a glimpse of the predator that lived beneath her conventional military exterior. There was something in her eyes that spoke of experiences far beyond ordinary combat. "Shadow 7, Davidson continued, is a joint military intelligence unit that operates in the spaces between official military action and covert intelligence operations. Its members are selected from the top 1% of Special Operations personnel and undergo training that pushes human capabilities to their absolute limits." Agent Chen activated the briefing screen, which displayed a world map dotted with red markers. Each of these locations represents a successful Shadow 7 operation over the past 5 years. Counterterrorism, hostage rescue, intelligence gathering, and threat neutralization in environments where conventional forces cannot operate. Blackwood stared at the map in amazement. There were markers in countries where he knew no American military operations had taken place, at least not officially. The scope of activities suggested a level of global engagement that far exceeded anything he'd imagined. "Captain Martinez," Davidson said, nodding toward Sarah, "has participated in operations on 4 continents. Her language skills include Arabic, Farsi, Russian, and Mandarin, all at native speaker level. Her combat training encompasses everything from urban warfare to deep wilderness survival." The first slide changed to show a timeline of operations. Even heavily redacted, the information was staggering. Terrorist cells disrupted, weapons smuggling operations shut down, intelligence assets extracted from hostile territory. Each entry represented weeks or months of dangerous work in conditions where a single mistake could trigger international incidents. The mission in Syria that earned her the Distinguished Service Cross, Agent Chen explained, involved infiltrating a terrorist stronghold that held 17 international hostages, including 3 American citizens and 2 Allied intelligence operatives. The facility was considered impregnable by conventional assault. A detailed tactical diagram appeared on the screen, showing a compound nestled in mountainous terrain. Even to Blackwood's experienced eye, the defensive positions looked formidable. Multiple overlapping fields of fire, natural barriers, and what appeared to be sophisticated surveillance systems. Captain Martinez and her team inserted via high-altitude parachute drop 30 kilometers from the target, Davidson continued. They spent 6 days moving through hostile territory, avoiding enemy patrols while conducting reconnaissance and preparing for the assault. The original plan called for a conventional breach and extract operation. However, intelligence received on site indicated that the hostages were being prepared for execution within hours of our arrival. Her voice was matter-of-fact, but Colonel Peterson noticed the slight tightening around her eyes that suggested the memory still carried emotional weight. He was beginning to understand that he'd been commanding someone whose actual experience made his own combat service look like a training exercise. When the extraction helicopters were forced to abort due to unexpected air defense systems, Agent Chen continued, Captain Martinez made the decision to proceed with the mission using only the 4-person team on the ground. The next slide showed photographs that made Blackwood's breath catch. The terrorist compound was a scene of devastation, with multiple structures reduced to rubble and abandoned weapons scattered throughout the area. Yet, in the center of the destruction, a group of freed hostages stood with their rescuers. The official report indicates that Captain Martinez personally engaged and neutralized 37 enemy combatants during the 12-hour firefight that followed the initial breach, Davidson said. She sustained multiple injuries, but refused extraction until all hostages were secured and her team was safely extracted. Blackwood found himself struggling to reconcile this information with the young woman sitting quietly in his office. The scale of the operation described would have been challenging for an entire company of conventional troops, yet it had been accomplished by a 4-person team led by someone he'd dismissed as unworthy of recognition. Her psychological evaluation following the mission, Agent Chen added, indicated stress tolerance levels that our specialists initially thought were measurement errors. Further testing confirmed that Captain Martinez possesses mental resilience capabilities that occur in fewer than 1 in 10,000 individuals. Sarah's expression remained neutral, though she was clearly uncomfortable with having her personal information discussed so openly. Her training had emphasized the importance of maintaining psychological as well as operational security, and this level of exposure felt like a violation of both. Davidson pulled out another document, this one bearing the seal of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The recommendation for Captain Martinez's Distinguished Service Cross was personally endorsed by the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs and the Secretary of Defense. The citation, while necessarily vague for security reasons, represents actions that saved not only the 17 hostages but potentially prevented a terrorist attack that could have killed hundreds of civilians. The weight of this revelation settled over the room like a physical presence. Blackwood realized that his attempt to deny Sarah her medal hadn't just been based on prejudice and ignorance, but it also contradicted decisions made at the highest levels of national command authority. General Blackwood, Davidson said, his tone becoming more serious, I need you to understand the implications of what occurred this morning. Captain Martinez's cover identity is essential to ongoing operations. Any compromise of her status could jeopardize missions that protect American lives and national security. The message was clear, though delivered with professional courtesy. Blackwood's public challenge to Sarah's qualifications had potentially damaged an intelligence asset of incalculable value. The consequences could extend far beyond a damaged career for him. Furthermore, Agent Chen added, Captain Martinez's presence in your unit serves operational purposes beyond simple cover. Her access to conventional military personnel and resources provides intelligence opportunities that have already yielded significant results. Colonel Peterson finally understood why some of his unit's reports had generated unusual interest from higher headquarters. Information that seemed routine to him had apparently been valuable to intelligence analysts tracking patterns and threats he wasn't even aware existed. Sarah spoke again, her voice carrying a note of concern. Sir, my ability to continue in this role depends on maintaining the confidence and respect of my nominal chain of command. This morning's events have potentially compromised relationships that took months to establish. It was a diplomatic way of saying that Blackwood's public humiliation of her had damaged her ability to function effectively in her cover role. The other soldiers in the unit would now question her status and qualifications, making it harder for her to gather the information and maintain the relationships that made her assignment valuable. Davidson nodded grimly. We're going to need to discuss options for damage control. Captain Martinez's work is too important to allow it to be compromised by misunderstandings about military hierarchy and gender roles. The criticism was subtle but unmistakable. Blackwood's assumptions about female soldiers and their capabilities had led him to challenge someone whose actual qualifications far exceeded his own. His prejudices hadn't just embarrassed him personally, they'd potentially damaged national security operations. What we need now, Agent Chen said, is a clear understanding of how to move forward, while protecting both ongoing operations and the individuals involved. The briefing screen changed to show a photograph of Sarah in a different context entirely. She was dressed in civilian clothes, standing in what appeared to be a Middle Eastern marketplace. But there was something in her bearing that suggested she was far more than a tourist. Her eyes were constantly scanning her surroundings, and her position relative to exits and potential threats showed tactical awareness that had become second nature. This photograph was taken during a counterintelligence operation in Damascus, Davidson explained. Captain Martinez spent 6 weeks operating under deep cover to identify and neutralize a network that was providing weapons to terrorist cells throughout the region. Blackwood studied the image with new understanding. The woman in the photograph looked nothing like a soldier, yet everything about her positioning and awareness suggested someone comfortable operating in extremely dangerous situations. Her transformation was so complete that he doubted he would have recognized her if he'd encountered her on the street. Her language and cultural training allows her to blend into local populations in ways that would be impossible for most American operatives. Agent Chen continued. This capability has been essential to operations that conventional forces simply cannot accomplish. The magnitude of Sarah's actual role was becoming clear to everyone in the room. She wasn't just a special operations soldier, she was a strategic intelligence asset, whose capabilities extended far beyond traditional military skills. Her value to national security was measured not in terms of individual combat effectiveness, but in her ability to operate invisibly in environments where American presence needed to remain completely secret. As the briefing continued, Blackwood began to comprehend not just the scope of his mistake, but the extraordinary nature of the soldier he'd so casually dismissed. The morning's events had revealed a world of military operations he'd never imagined, and had shown him just how much he didn't understand about modern warfare. The question now was how to repair the damage while protecting operations that were clearly far more important than his own wounded pride. Agent Chen pulled out a tablet and swiped through several classified databases with practiced efficiency. The information she displayed made the previous revelations seem almost mundane in comparison. Sarah's true service record wasn't just impressive, it was the stuff of intelligence legends. General Blackwood, Chen began, what I'm about to show you represents 15 years of service that officially doesn't exist. Captain Martinez began her military career not as a conventional soldier, but as part of a recruitment program designed to identify individuals with extraordinary potential for special operations. The screen displayed Sarah's actual age as 31, not the 26 that appeared in her cover file. She'd entered the military at 16, through a classified program that recruited exceptional individuals before they could be influenced by conventional military thinking. Her entire adult life had been dedicated to becoming the perfect covert operative. The West Point graduation in her cover file is accurate, Davidson added, but it represents only one aspect of her education. She also holds advanced degrees in international relations from Georgetown, psychology from Stanford, and strategic studies from the War College, all completed while maintaining her operational status. Sarah shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Having her background exposed so thoroughly went against every instinct developed through years of maintaining operational security. But the situation had progressed beyond the point where normal protocols could apply. Her physical training, Chen continued, includes certifications in martial arts systems that most people have never heard of. She's qualified in 17 different weapon systems, certified as an expert in explosive ordnance disposal, and trained in medical procedures that allow her to perform battlefield surgery. Colonel Peterson felt his understanding of military capability expanding in ways he'd never anticipated. The soldier he'd known as a competent but unremarkable captain was actually a walking arsenal of skills that represented the pinnacle of human training and development. But those are just the basic qualifications, Davidson said, his voice taking on an edge of genuine respect. Captain Martinez has also developed capabilities that push the boundaries of what we thought possible for individual operators. The next series of photographs showed Sarah in environments that ranged from Arctic wilderness to urban combat zones. In each image, she appeared perfectly adapted to her surroundings, whether rappelling down a mountain face in Afghanistan or moving through crowded streets in an unnamed city. "This mission in Pakistan," Agent Chen said, indicating a photograph of Sarah in local dress, required her to operate alone for 4 months while tracking a high-value target through Taliban-controlled territory. She successfully identified and eliminated a bomb maker responsible for attacks that had killed over 200 coalition personnel. Blackwood stared at the image with growing comprehension. The figure in traditional Pakistani clothing showed no trace of the American soldier he'd confronted that morning. Her transformation was so complete that she could have passed for a native of the region. The psychological preparation for such extended deep cover operations, Davidson explained, requires mental flexibility that borders on the supernatural. Captain Martinez has successfully maintained multiple identities simultaneously while conducting operations that would break most people psychologically. Sarah finally spoke, her voice carrying a note of weariness that suggested the cost of such abilities. The training required to maintain operational effectiveness across such varied environments takes years to develop and constant practice to maintain. Each assignment requires becoming someone completely different while retaining the skills necessary to complete the mission. Her words revealed something that the briefing materials couldn't convey: the personal sacrifice required to become such an effective operative. She'd given up any possibility of a normal life or identity in service to missions that most people would never know had occurred. The Syria mission that earned her medal, Agent Chen continued, was actually a secondary objective. Her primary mission involved infiltrating the terrorist organization for 6 weeks prior to the hostage rescue, gathering intelligence that led to the disruption of 3 other terrorist cells and prevented at least 2 major attacks on civilian targets. The scope of Sarah's actual accomplishments was staggering. What had appeared to be a single heroic action was actually the culmination of months of dangerous intelligence work that had saved hundreds of lives beyond the 17 hostages. Davidson activated a new screen that showed a global network diagram connecting terrorist organizations, weapon suppliers, and funding sources. The intelligence Captain Martinez gathered during her infiltration revealed connections between groups that we hadn't previously understood. Her work led to coordinated operations across 4 countries that disrupted terrorist financing for over a year. Blackwood began to understand that he hadn't just insulted a decorated soldier. He'd publicly humiliated someone whose work had directly contributed to American national security in ways that would never be publicly acknowledged. The medal she'd earned represented not just personal courage, but strategic intelligence victories that had shaped international counter-terrorism efforts. "There's another aspect to this situation that requires discussion," Agent Chen said, her voice taking on a more serious tone. "Captain Martinez's cover identity serves purposes beyond individual operations. Her presence in conventional units provides training opportunities that improve overall military effectiveness." The screen changed to show performance metrics from Sarah's current unit. Combat readiness scores, training effectiveness ratings, and morale indicators all showed significant improvements since her arrival. Her influence as a supposed conventional officer had elevated the capabilities of everyone around her. "The soldiers serving with Captain Martinez," Davidson explained, "have been exposed to training techniques and tactical thinking that they would never encounter through normal military education. Her presence has created a multiplication effect that extends our special operations capabilities into conventional forces." Colonel Peterson suddenly understood why his unit had been selected for several high-profile training exercises, and why their performance evaluations had drawn attention from senior commanders. Sarah's quiet influence had been elevating their capabilities in ways he'd never recognized. "This is what makes the morning's events so problematic," Chen continued. "Captain Martinez's effectiveness depends on the respect and trust of her fellow soldiers. When a general officer publicly questions her qualifications, it undermines relationships that took months to build." The diplomatic language couldn't disguise the reality. Blackwood's prejudices had potentially damaged an intelligence asset that had taken years to develop and position. His assumptions about gender and conventional military hierarchy had led him to sabotage operations he couldn't even comprehend. Sarah looked directly at Blackwood for the first time since the briefing began. "General, I want you to understand that I take no pleasure in this situation. My preference would have been to accept whatever recognition you felt was appropriate and continue my mission without incident." Her words carried no accusation, but their impact was devastating. She'd been prepared to sacrifice recognition she'd legitimately earned rather than compromise her cover, until Blackwood's public challenge had forced her to reveal capabilities that were supposed to remain secret. Davidson pulled out one final document, this one bearing multiple agency seals. "What we're dealing with now is damage assessment and mitigation. Captain Martinez's cover may be compromised to the point where she can no longer operate effectively in conventional military environments." The implications were sobering. If Sarah's true identity became widely known, it wouldn't just end her current assignment. It could compromise every operation she'd ever participated in and endanger assets and allies around the world. "The question we face," Agent Chen said, "is whether the situation can be salvaged or whether we need to extract Captain Martinez and create an entirely new cover identity." What would extraction mean for Captain Martinez? Sarah answered herself, her voice matter-of-fact despite the enormity of what she was describing. "Complete identity replacement. New background, new training records, new relationships. Everything I've built over the past 2 years would be abandoned." The personal cost was staggering. Sarah would lose not just her current assignment, but every relationship and connection she'd developed. Friends, colleagues, and operational contacts would have to be abandoned as if they'd never existed. "There is another option," Davidson said slowly, "but it would require unprecedented cooperation and discretion from everyone involved." He looked directly at Blackwood as he spoke, making it clear that the general's actions would determine whether Sarah's mission could continue or whether years of careful preparation would be lost forever. The room fell silent as everyone contemplated the magnitude of the decision before them. The morning's events had revealed capabilities and operations that redefined their understanding of modern military service. Now they faced choices that would determine not just one soldier's future, but the continuation of missions that protected American lives and interests around the world. The weight of responsibility settled over General Blackwood as he realized that his prejudices hadn't just embarrassed him personally, they'd potentially compromised operations that were far more important than his own career or reputation. The silence in General Blackwood's office stretched for nearly a minute as the weight of the situation settled over everyone present. The morning's events had escalated far beyond a simple disagreement about military honors into a crisis that could affect national security operations spanning multiple continents. Davidson was the first to break the silence. "The option I mentioned would require General Blackwood to take extraordinary measures to repair the damage to Captain Martinez's cover identity, while ensuring that no one involved in this morning's events discusses what they've learned today." Blackwood nodded slowly, beginning to understand that his response to this situation would define not just his remaining military career, but also his personal integrity. "What specifically would be required?" "First," Agent Chen replied, "a public ceremony where Captain Martinez receives her medal with full honors and your personal endorsement of her exceptional service. The ceremony would need to emphasize your confidence in her abilities and your recognition that initial appearances can be deceiving." Sarah spoke up, her voice carrying a note of concern. "That approach carries risks of its own. Too much attention could be as damaging as the original controversy." And Davidson nodded in agreement. "That's true, but the alternative is complete extraction and identity replacement, which would waste years of preparation and positioning. We need to find a middle ground that restores confidence without drawing excessive scrutiny." Colonel Peterson, who had remained quiet throughout most of the briefing, finally spoke. "General Blackwood, the soldiers in this unit respect direct communication. If you explain that you made a hasty judgment based on incomplete information, and that further review confirmed Captain Martinez's exceptional qualifications, they'll accept that explanation." The suggestion had merit, but it would require Blackwood to publicly acknowledge his mistake and demonstrate the kind of leadership that put mission success above personal pride. For a career officer accustomed to being unquestionably right, It would be a difficult but necessary step. There's another consideration, Sarah added. My effectiveness in this unit depends on maintaining normal working relationships. If the other soldiers begin treating me differently because they suspect there's more to my background, that could be as problematic as the original controversy. She was highlighting one of the fundamental challenges of deep cover operations. Success required maintaining relationships that were necessarily built on deception, while any revelation of the truth could make those relationships impossible to sustain. Agent Chen pulled up a new document on her tablet. We've prepared a modified cover story that addresses some of these concerns. Captain Martinez's record would show participation in a classified special operations training program that explains her enhanced capabilities without revealing the full extent of her role. The proposed cover story would allow Sarah to acknowledge superior training and experience while maintaining the fiction that she was fundamentally a conventional soldier who had received additional specialized education. It would explain her capabilities without exposing the full scope of her background. The challenge, Davidson continued, is ensuring that everyone who witnessed this morning's events understands the importance of discretion, while providing them with enough information to restore confidence in Captain Martinez's qualifications. Blackwood found himself confronting the full implications of leadership under circumstances he'd never anticipated. His decision would affect not just his own career, but also ongoing operations that protected American lives and national security interests around the world. I need to understand something, Blackwood said, looking directly at Sarah. If I hadn't challenged your medal this morning, would any of this have come to light? Sarah considered her response carefully. No, sir. My preference is always to maintain cover and complete my mission without drawing attention to capabilities that need to remain classified. This morning's events forced revelations that I would have preferred to avoid. The honesty of her response struck Blackwood profoundly. She'd been prepared to accept his decision and continue her mission even if it meant sacrificing recognition she'd legitimately earned. Her commitment to the larger mission had been total, until his public challenge had made maintaining her cover impossible. Davidson leaned forward, his expression serious. General, I need you to understand that Captain Martinez represents an investment of over 15 years and millions of dollars in training and preparation. Her loss would be felt not just in current operations, but in our future capability to address evolving threats. The scope of the investment in Sarah's development was staggering. She represented not just individual capability, but also institutional knowledge and operational experience that couldn't be easily replaced. Her training had been tailored to address threats and challenges that conventional military education couldn't anticipate. More importantly, Agent Chen added, her work has directly prevented terrorist attacks that would have killed hundreds of civilians. The intelligence she's gathered and the operations she's participated in have made America safer, in ways that can't be publicly acknowledged. Colonel Peterson suddenly understood the true significance of what he'd witnessed. The quiet, competent officer he'd known as Captain Martinez was actually someone whose service had shaped global events and saved lives on a scale that few soldiers ever achieved. Blackwood made his decision. What do you need me to do to repair this situation? The question marked a fundamental shift in his approach. Instead of defending his position or minimizing his mistake, he was accepting responsibility and asking how to fix the damage his prejudices had caused. Davidson nodded approvingly. First, we need to convene the unit this afternoon for a formal presentation of Captain Martinez's medal. You'll need to acknowledge that additional review of her service record confirmed exceptional qualifications that weren't apparent from standard documentation. Second, Agent Chen continued, you'll need to emphasize that some aspects of military service involve classified operations that can't be discussed publicly, but that create capabilities and experience beyond normal measures. Sarah spoke up again. General, I want you to know that I understand the difficult position this situation has created for you. My hope is that we can move forward in a way that allows everyone to continue serving effectively. Her gracious response to his earlier treatment demonstrated the kind of leadership and professionalism that explained why she'd been selected for such demanding assignments. Even under circumstances where she'd been publicly humiliated, her focus remained on mission success rather than personal vindication. The afternoon ceremony was conducted with military precision and dignity that restored confidence while avoiding excessive attention. Blackwood presented Sarah's medal with words that acknowledged exceptional service while maintaining operational security. His public recognition of his initial misunderstanding demonstrated the kind of leadership that earned rather than demanded respect. "Captain Martinez," Blackwood said as he pinned the Distinguished Service Cross to her uniform, "represents the finest traditions of military service. Her actions in combat reflect not only personal courage, but also the kind of professional excellence that makes our nation safer." The soldiers assembled for the ceremony responded with genuine enthusiasm, their respect for Sarah reinforced by their general's acknowledgement of her exceptional qualifications. The controversy of the morning was replaced by pride in serving alongside someone whose achievements had earned such high recognition. In the weeks that followed, Sarah was able to continue her mission with restored credibility and enhanced effectiveness. Her relationships within the unit were actually strengthened by the general's public recognition of her capabilities, while her true role remained protected by carefully maintained operational security. General Blackwood learned lessons that extended far beyond this single incident. His assumptions about military capability and gender roles had nearly compromised operations of crucial importance to national security. The experience forced him to confront prejudices that had limited his understanding of modern warfare and the diverse capabilities required for 21st-century military challenges. Sarah's story became legend within special operations circles, though the specific details remained classified. She had demonstrated not only exceptional operational capability, but also the kind of strategic thinking and personal integrity that defined the highest levels of military service. The morning that had begun with prejudice and ignorance ended with recognition and understanding. More importantly, it ensured that critical missions could continue with the personnel and capabilities required to protect American interests around the world. Years later, when Blackwood retired from military service, he would often reflect on the day he learned that the most dangerous operatives didn't always look like what tradition expected. The lesson had cost him personally, but it had also made him a better leader and a more effective guardian of the nation he'd sworn to protect. Sarah continued her service in roles that would never be publicly acknowledged, her story known only to those with the highest security clearances. Her medal represented not just individual achievement, but also the dedication of countless men and women who served in shadows to protect a nation that would never fully understand the scope of their sacrifice. The general had tried to take her medal, not realizing she was elite special forces. In the end, he learned that true military excellence comes in many forms, and that the most valuable warriors are often those whose greatest victories must remain forever secret.